It takes a lot to explore space. Strength, grit, determination. But there are some urges that technology just can't compensate for. Cosmic Casanova by Arthur C. Clarke. Read by Carl. This time I was 5 weeks out from base planet before the symptoms became acute. On the last trip it had taken only a month. I was not sure whether the difference was due to advancing age, or to something the dietitians had put into my food capsules. Or it could merely have been that I was busier. The arm of the galaxy I was scudding was heavily populated, where stars only a couple of light years apart, so I had little time to brood over the girls I'd left behind me. So as one star had been classified, and the automatic search for planets had been completed, it was time to head for the next sun. And then, as happened in about one case out of 10, planets did turn up. I'd be furiously busy for several days, seeing that Max, the ship's electronic computer, got all the information down on his tapes. Now, however, I was through this densely packed region of space. Sometimes it took as much as 3 days to get from sun to sun. That was time enough for sex to come tiptoeing aboard the ship, and for the memories of my last leave to make the months ahead look very empty indeed. Perhaps I had overdone it back on Diodani 4, while my ship was being reprovisioned and I was supposed to be resting between missions. But a survey scout spends 80% of his time alone in space. Human nature being what it is, he must be expected to make up for lost time. I'd not merely done that, I'd built up considerable covenant for the future, though not, it seemed, enough to last me through this trip. First, I recalled wistfully, there had been Helene. She was blonde, cuddly, and compliant, although rather unimaginative. We had a fine time together until her husband came back from his mission. He was extremely decent about it, but pointed out, reasonably enough, that Helene would now have very little time for other engagements. Fortunately, I had already made contact with Iris, so the hiatus was negligible. Now, Iris was really something. Even now it makes me squirm to think of her. When that affair broke up, for the simple reason that a man has to go to little sleep sometime, I swore off women for a whole week. Then I came across a touching poem by an old Norse writer named James Doan. It's worth looking up if you can read primitive English, which reminded me that time lost can never be regained. How true, I thought. So I put on my spaceman's uniform and wandered down to the beach of the planet's only sea. There was no need to walk more than a few hundred meters before I spotted a dozen possibilities, brushed off several volunteers, and signed up Natalie. That worked out pretty well at first, until Natalie started objecting to Ruth. Or was it Kay? I can't stand girls who think they own a man, so I blasted off after a rather difficult scene that was quite expensive in crockery. That left me at loose ends for a couple of days. Then Cynthia came to the rescue but by now you'll have gotten the general idea, so I won't bother you with details. These, then, were the fond memories I started to work back through while one star dwindled behind me and the next flared up ahead. On this trip, I deliberately left my pinups behind, having decided they only made matters worse. That was a mistake. Being quite a good artist in a rather specialized way, I started to draw my own. It wasn't long before I had a collection that would be proud to match on any respectable planet. I would hate you to think that this preoccupation affected my efficiency as a unit of the galactic survey. It was only on the long, dull run between the stars, when I had no one to talk to but the computer, that I found my glands getting the better of me. Max, my electronic colleague, was good enough company in the ordinary course of events, but there are some things a machine can't be expected to understand. I often hurt his feelings when it was in one of my irritable moods, and lost my temper for no apparent reason. "What's the matter, Joe?" Max would say plaintively. "Surely not mad at me because I beat you at chess again. Remember, I warned you I would." "Oh, go to hell," I'd snarl back. Then I'd have an anxious 5 minutes while I straightened things out with a rather literal-minded navigation robot. 2 months out from base, with 30 suns and 4 solar systems logged, something happened that wiped all my personal problems from my mind. The long-range monitor began to beep. A faint signal was coming from somewhere in the section of space ahead of me. I got the most accurate bearing as I could. The transmission was unmodulated, very narrow band, clearly a beacon of some kind. Yet no ship of ours, to the best of my knowledge, had ever entered this remote neck of the universe. I was supposed to be spotting completely unexplored territory. This, I told myself, is it. My big moment. The payoff for all the lonely years I'd spent in space. At some unknown distance ahead of me was another civilization, a race sufficiently advanced to possess hyperradio. I knew exactly what I had to do. As soon as Max had confirmed my readings and made his analysis, I launched a message carrier back to base. If anything happened to me, the survey would know where and guess why. It was some consolation to think if I didn't come home on schedule, my friends would be out here in force to pick up the pieces. Soon there was no doubt where the signal was coming from, and I changed course for the small yellow star that was dead in line with the beacon. No one, I told myself, would plan on a wave this strong unless they had space travel themselves. I might be running into a culture as advanced as my own, with all that implied. I was still a long way away when I started calling, not very hopefully, with my own transmitter. To my surprise, there was a prompt reaction. The continuous wave immediately broke up into a string of pulses, repeated over and over again. Even Max couldn't make anything of the message. It probably meant, "Who the heck are you?" which was not a big enough sample for even the most intelligent of translating machines to get its teeth into. Hour by hour, the signal grew in strength. Those don't know I was still around and was reading loud and clear, I occasionally shot back the same message along the way it'd come. And then I had my second big surprise. I expected them, whoever or whatever they might be, to switch to speech transmission as soon as I was near enough for good reception. This is precisely what they did. What I not expected was that their voices would be human. The language spoke to an unmistakable but to me unintelligible brand of English. I could identify about one word in 10. The others were, although quite unknown or otherwise distorted so badly I could not recognize them. When the first words came over the loudspeaker, I guessed the truth. This was no alien non-human race, but something almost less exciting, perhaps a good deal safer as far as the solitary scout was concerned. I'd established contact with one of the lost colonies of the First Empire, the pioneers who had set off from Earth in the early days of interstellar exploration, 5,000 years ago. When the Empire collapsed, most of these isolated groups had perished or been sent back to barbarism. Here, it seemed, was one that had survived. I talked back to them in the slowest and simplest English I could master, but 5,000 years is a long time in the life of any language, and no real communication was possible. They were clearly excited at the contact, pleasurably as far as I could judge. This is not always the case. Some of the isolated cultures left over from the First Empire had become violently xenophobic and react almost with hysteria to the knowledge they are not alone in space. Our attempts to communicate were not making much progress when a new factor appeared, one that changed my outlook abruptly. A woman's voice started to come from the speaker. It was the most beautiful voice I'd ever heard, and even without the lonely weeks in space that lay behind me, I think I would have fallen in love with it at once. Very deep, yet still completely feminine. Had a warm, caressing quality that seemed to ravish all my senses. I was so stunned, in fact, it was several minutes before I realized I could understand what my invisible enchantress was saying. She was speaking English that was almost 50% comprehensible. To cut a short story shorter, it did not take me very long to learn her name was Liala, and she was the only philologist on our planet that specialized in primitive English. As soon as contact had been made with my ship, she had been called in to do the translating. Luck, it seemed, was very much on my side. The interpreter could so easily have been some ancient white-bearded fossil. As the hours ticked away and her sun grew ever larger in the sky ahead of me, Liala and I became the best of friends. Because time was short, I had to operate faster than I had ever done before. The fact that no one could understand exactly what we were saying to each other inserted our privacy. Indeed, Liala's own knowledge of English was sufficiently imperfect for me to get away with some outrageous remarks. There was no danger to going too far with a girl who would give you the benefit of the doubt by deciding you couldn't possibly have meant what she thought you said. Need I say that I felt very, very happy? It looks as if my official and personal interests were very neatly coinciding. There was, however, just one slight worry. So far I had not seen Lila. What if she turned out to be absolutely hideous? My first chance of settling that important question came 6 hours from planetfall. Now I was near enough to pick up video transmissions. It took Max only a few seconds to analyze the incoming signals and adjust the ship's receiver accordingly. At last I could have my first close-ups of the approaching planet. And of Lila. She was almost as beautiful as her voice. I stared at the screen, unable to speak for timeless seconds. Presumably she broke the silence. "What's the matter?" she asked. Haven't you ever seen a girl before? I had to admit I'd seen 2 or even 3, but never one like her. It was a great relief to find her reaction to me was quite favorable, so it seemed that nothing stood in the way of our future happiness. If we could evade the army of scientists and politicians who would surround me as soon as I landed, our hopes of privacy were very slender. So much so, in fact, I felt tempted to break one of my most ironclad rules. I'd even consider marrying Liala if that was the only way we could arrange matters. Yes, that 2 months in space had really put a strain on my system. 5,000 years of history. 10,000 if you count mine as well. Can't be condensed easily in a few hours. But with such a delightful tutor, I absorbed knowledge fast. And everything I missed, Max got down his infallible memory circuits. Already, as our planet was terminally called, had been at the very frontier of interstellar colonization. When the tide of empire had retreated, they had been left high and dry. In their struggle to survive, they had lost much of their original scientific knowledge, including the secret of the star drive. They could not escape from their own solar system, but they had little incentive to do so. Their world was fertile, and the low gravity, only quarter reverse, had given the colonists the physical strength they needed. Even allowing for any natural bias on Lila's part, it sounded a very attractive place. The little yellow sun was already showing a visible disk when I had my brilliant idea. The reception committee had been warning me. I suddenly realized how I could keep it at bay. The planet would need Lila's cooperation, but by this time that was assured. If I say so without sounding too immodest, I always have had a way with women. This was not my first courtship by TV. So they learned, about 2 hours before I was due to land, that survey scouts were very shy and suspicious creatures. Owing to previous sad experiences with unfriendly cultures, I politely refused to walk like a fly inside their parlor. As there was only one of me, I preferred to meet only one of them, some isolated spot to be mutually selected. If that meeting went well, I would then fly to the capital city. If not, I'd head back the way I came. Hope they would not think this behavior discourteous, but I was a lonely traveler a long way from home, and as reasonable people, I'm sure they'd see my point of view. They did. The choice of the emissary was obvious, and Liala promptly became a world heroine by bravely volunteering to meet the monster from space. She radioed back, she told her anxious friends, within an hour of coming aboard my ship. Tried to make it 2 hours, but she said that might be overdoing it, and nasty-minded people might start to talk. The ship was coming down to the atmosphere when I suddenly remembered my compromising pin-ups and had to make a rapid string cleaning. Even so, one rather explicit masterpiece slipped down behind a chart rack and caused me acute embarrassment when it was discovered by the maintenance crew months later. When I got back to the control room, the vision screen showed the empty, open plain, the very center of which Lala was waiting for me. In 2 minutes, I would hold her in my arms, be able to drink the fragrance of her hair, feel her body yield in all the right places. I didn't want her to watch the landing, for I could rely on Max to do his usual flawless job. Instead, I hurried out to the airlock and waited with what patience I could muster for the opening of the doors that barred me from Liala. It seemed an age before Max completed the routine air checks and gave the outer door opening signal. I was through the exit before the metal disc had finished moving, and I stood at last on the rich soil of the planet. I remembered that I weighed only 40 pounds here, so I moved with caution despite my eagerness. Yet I'd forgotten, living in my fuel's paradise, what a fractional gravity could do to the human body in the course of 200 generations. On a small planet, evolution can do a lot in 5,000 years. Lara was waiting for me. She was as lovely as her picture. There was, however, one trifling matter that TV screens hadn't told me. I never liked big girls. I like it even less now. If I'd still wanted to, suppose I could have embraced Liala. but I have looked such a fool, standing on tiptoe, with my arms wrapped around her knees. The end.